After being wrongfully sent to Juvie, he returned to find a farm deed with his name. And what he discovered there would change everything. 2 years. That's how long they give you to forget who you are. If you've ever felt like your life was stolen from you, if you've ever had to fight to remember your own name, I want you to stick around and listen to this. Because this isn't just my story. It's a story for anyone who's ever been told they're worthless. If that's you, hit that subscribe button because we're building a community for people who get it. Now, let's begin. 2 years is 730 days of staring at the same gray walls, eating the same gray food, and wearing the same gray uniform until the color seeps into your soul. It's long enough for the world outside to forget you, and for you to almost forget it back. The day they let me out, the air tasted strange. It was sharp with the scent of exhaust fumes and damp asphalt, a chaotic perfume of freedom I'd forgotten. My hands felt too light without the familiar weight of institutional routine. I was 18 years old, a legal adult by exactly 7 hours, holding a thin manila envelope with my release papers and the $27 they give you to start your life over. My social worker, a tired woman named Ms. Albright, had dropped me at the bus station with a final weary piece of advice. "Leo, you've got a clean slate, don't waste it." A clean slate. It sounded nice. It sounded like a lie. My slate wasn't clean. It was shattered. The pieces were scattered across 2 years of my life, stolen by a lie I couldn't fight. The charge was possession with intent to distribute. A baggie of pills, not mine, found in my locker. I was 16, mouthy, and from the wrong side of the tracks. It was an easy conviction. My grandmother, Elena, had been the only person who believed me. She was the only person I had, and she had died 6 months into my sentence. Pneumonia, they said, a quiet, lonely end in a hospital bed while I was locked away, counting ceiling tiles. The bus groaned and hissed, pulling away from the city and into the rolling green countryside that bled into the familiar territory of my childhood. I watched the concrete towers shrink in the rearview mirror, replaced by wide open skies and trees that scraped at the clouds. With every mile, the knot in my stomach tightened. I had nowhere to go. The small apartment Gran and I had shared would be long gone. My friends, if I could even call them that anymore, had moved on. I was a ghost returning to a haunted house. The bus ticket was for a town called Oak Haven, a place I barely remembered visiting once or twice as a kid. Ms. Albright had given it to me along with a slip of paper. "Your grandmother's lawyer," she'd explained, her expression unreadable. "He's been trying to reach you. Something about her estate." Estate! The word was comical. My grandmother was a cleaner. She scrubbed floors and polished other people's silver. Her estate consisted of a second-hand television, a collection of chipped ceramic birds, and a love so fierce it felt like a physical shield. Or it had, until it was gone. The lawyer's office was on a quiet main street that looked like a movie set. Old brick buildings, a bakery with a cheerful bell, a hardware store with a faded sign. It was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone's business. My business was written all over my face, the hollowed-out look, the ill-fitting clothes they'd given me upon release, the way I flinched when a car backfired. Mr. Abernathy was a man made of tweed and quiet disappointment. His office smelled of old paper and peppermint. He looked at me over the top of his spectacles, his eyes assessing, calculating. He'd probably already sized me up as a lost cause. "Leo Reyes?" he asked, his voice dry as dust. I nodded, my own voice stuck in my throat. I hadn't spoken more than a few words to anyone all day. "I am Arthur Abernathy. I was your grandmother's attorney." He gestured to a worn leather chair. "Please sit." He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He opened a folder on his desk, the papers inside brittle with age. Your grandmother, Elena Reyes, passed away 18 months ago. I am the executor of her will." He paused, his gaze softening for just a fraction of a second. "I'm sorry for your loss. She was a formidable woman." Formidable, that was a word for her. She was tough, yes, but also warm and funny in a way most people never got to see. She could make a garden grow from the rockiest soil, and a meal for two out of nothing but flour and hope. The thought of her brought a familiar ache to my chest, a hollow space that nothing could fill. Her assets were modest, Mr. Abernathy continued, pulling me back to the stuffy office. But she was very specific in her instructions. Everything was to be held in trust for you until your 18th birthday, which, I believe, was today. He slid a thick, folded document across the desk. It was heavy, important-looking. "This is the deed to a property just outside of town. 120 acres of land, a farmhouse, and a barn. It's been in her family for generations. It is now yours, free and clear. The property taxes have been paid up for the next 5 years." I stared at the document. My name, Leonardo Reyes, was typed in stark black ink. 120 acres. It didn't make any sense. We had lived in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment, always one paycheck away from disaster. Where did a farm come from? I don't understand," I stammered. "Gran never said anything about a farm." "She was a private person," Abernathy said simply. "She purchased it back nearly 20 years ago before you were born. Kept it as a contingency." He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "There is one other thing." He reached into the folder and pulled out a simple white envelope. My name was written on the front in Gran's familiar, spidery cursive. It was a ghost's handwriting. Seeing it made my breath catch. "She left this for you. She instructed me to give it to you on your 18th birthday, along with the deed." I took the envelope. The paper was cool against my skin. It felt both impossibly fragile and heavier than the deed itself. It was a direct link to her, a voice from the grave. "Is that all?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "There is a matter of some interest from a development company, Viridian," he said, his tone shifting back to business. "They've been making offers on all the properties in that valley, including your grandmother's. They've made a standing offer of $200,000 for yours." $200,000? The number was astronomical, unreal. It was more money than I had ever imagined seeing in one place. It was enough to disappear, to start over, for real this time. A clean slate, bought and paid for. "They're very persistent," Abernathy added. "Your grandmother refused to sell, repeatedly, but now that the property is yours, the offer stands. You should think about it." I stood up, clutching the deed and the letter. The air in the room was suffocating. $200,000. A farm I never knew existed. A letter from a dead woman. It was too much. I need to go there," I said, more to myself than to him. "To the farm." Abernathy nodded slowly. He wrote an address on a small card and handed it to me, along with a set of old iron keys. "A man named Gus runs the local taxi service. He'll know the place. It's been sitting empty for a long time, son. Be prepared." Prepared for what? For the dust? For the loneliness? For the memories I didn't even know were waiting for me? I walked out of his office and back into the too bright afternoon, the keys cold in my pocket, the letter burning a hole in my hand. I had a choice, a check for a new life or a key to an old one. I didn't know it then, but standing on that quiet street, I was at a crossroads that had been laid for me before I was even born. The choice I would make wasn't just about a piece of land. It was about justice, sacrifice, and the true meaning of inheritance. My grandmother had left me more than a farm. She had left me a fight. The taxi driver, Gus, was a talkative man with a kind, weathered face and a truck that smelled faintly of hay and coffee. He glanced at me in the rearview mirror as we pulled away from Main Street, his eyes lingering for a moment on my thin jacket and the tremor in my hands. He didn't ask where I'd come from. In a town this small, he probably already knew. "Headed out to the old Reyes place, huh?" he said, his voice a low, friendly rumble. "Haven't driven anyone out that way in years. Not since your grandmother. Well, not in a long time." I just nodded, watching. The town give way to winding country roads. The neat houses and manicured lawns were replaced by sprawling fields, bordered by crumbling stone walls. The farther we drove, the more the landscape seemed to unravel, becoming wilder, more untamed. "Your grandma, Elena, she was one of a kind," Gus continued, filling the silence. "Tough as an old boot, that one. Most folks around here thought she was strange, keeping that big plot of land and never doing much with it. But she was good people, always paid cash, always tipped well." He chuckled. "Said the land had old bones, that it needed to rest." Old bones. The phrase sent a shiver down my spine. I thought of Mr. Abernathy's words about the development company, Viridian. "Do you know anything about a company called Viridian?" I asked, my voice raspy. Gus's friendly demeanor tightened almost imperceptibly. His knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "Oh, I know 'em," he said, his tone flat. "Everyone around here knows 'em. They swoop in like vultures when they smell money, buying up family farms, promising jobs and prosperity. What they're really selling is a fantasy, a golf course and luxury condos nobody who lives here can afford." He shot me another look in the mirror, this one sharp, knowing. "They wanted your grandmother's land bad. It's the key to the whole valley, the highest point, best view. They hounded her for years, sent men in suits, sent letters. She never budged. Told one of 'em to use his fancy offer sheet to fertilize his own lawn. A small ghost of a smile touched my lips. That sounded like Gran, fierce, unmovable. "She loved that land," Gus said softly as if speaking to himself, "even if she never lived on it. Said it was in her blood." We turned off the paved road onto a dirt track, the truck rattling over ruts and stones. The trees grew thicker here, their branches interlocking overhead to form a dark green tunnel. After another mile, the tunnel opened up and Gus slowed the truck to a stop. "Well," he said, shutting off the engine. "Here you are." I looked out the window and my heart sank. It wasn't a farm, it was a ruin. The farmhouse, a 2-story wooden structure that might have once been white, was now a peeling, spectral gray. Its porch sagged like a tired old man, and several windows were boarded up. The barn beside it was a skeleton of weathered planks, its great doors hanging crookedly on rusted hinges. The fields, all 120 acres of them, were a sea of tangled weeds and wildflowers stretching out towards a line of dark hills in the distance. It was desolate, it was forgotten, and it was mine. I paid Gus with a few of my precious dollars, and he gave me a long, searching look. "Listen, kid," he said, his voice serious. "If you need anything, a ride, a hot meal, you call me. The folks at the diner in town, they'll know how to find me." He handed me a worn business card. It was a gesture of kindness so unexpected it almost broke me. "Thanks," I managed to say. He nodded, then put the truck in reverse, kicking up a cloud of dust as he drove away, leaving me alone in the oppressive silence. I stood there for a long time, just looking. The only sounds were the buzz of insects and the whisper of the wind through the tall grass. This was my inheritance. A collapsing house, a broken-down barn, and a field of weeds. The $200,000 offer from Viridian suddenly felt less like an option and more like a lifeline. I could sign a paper, walk away from this wreck, and never look back. I could be on a bus to anywhere, a new name, a new life, No one would blame me. It was the smart thing to do, the sane thing to do. But then my fingers brushed against the envelope in my pocket. Gran's letter. She hadn't kept this place for 20 years just for me to sell it to the first bidder. She had refused them, fought them. There was a reason. I needed to know that reason. Taking a deep breath, I walked towards the house, the iron keys heavy in my hand. The porch steps groaned under my weight, and the air grew colder as I approached the front door. The key was stiff in the lock, rusted and reluctant. I had to put my shoulder into it, grunting with effort until, with a loud, grating crack, the lock gave way. The door swung inward on a long, mournful creak, opening into darkness. The air that rushed out was thick and stale, a time capsule of dust, mildew, and something else. Something that smelled like old memories and faded grief. I stepped across the threshold from the bright, indifferent sun into the shadowed heart of my grandmother's secret life. The house was a museum of disuse. Furniture, a simple sofa, a sturdy wooden table, a few chairs, was draped in white sheets, their forms like sleeping ghosts in the dim light, filtering through the grimy windows. Dust motes danced in the sunbeams, a silent, swirling galaxy. Everything was coated in a thick layer of grime, but underneath it, the place felt solid, cared for in its own way. It hadn't been lived in, but it hadn't been entirely abandoned either. I walked through the downstairs rooms, my footsteps echoing in the stillness. The living room, the small dining area, and finally, the kitchen. It was a simple space with a cast-iron stove and wooden countertops. And there, sitting in the exact center of the kitchen table, as if it had been placed there only yesterday, was another envelope. This one was older, yellowed at the edges, but the handwriting was the same. My name, written in her elegant, familiar script. It wasn't the letter Mr. Abernathy had given me. It was a different one. I set the deed and the first letter down on the counter, my hands shaking slightly as I picked up the one from the table. It was unsealed. I pulled out the single folded page inside. The ink was slightly faded, but the words were clear. "My dearest Leo," it began. The sight of those words, a direct address from her, sent a jolt through me. It was like hearing her voice in the empty room. "If you are reading this, it means I am gone and you have come home. I am so sorry, my boy. So sorry I couldn't be there to see you walk free. Know that not a day went by that my heart wasn't with you." I had to stop, my vision blurring. I leaned against the counter, the worn linoleum cool beneath my hands, and took a ragged breath. I hadn't cried in 2 years, not when they sentenced me, not when I heard she was gone. The tears were frozen inside me, a glacier of grief I couldn't touch. But her words were like the sun starting to melt the edges. I forced myself to keep reading. "This house holds memories, but the land holds the truth. They will try to take it from you, Leo. Men with easy smiles and fat wallets. They think because you are young and alone, you will be weak. Do not sell, not yet. This land is your birthright and your shield. I have left you a defense, but you will have to find it. What is buried is not always dead. Start in the barn, under the place where the summer swallows used to nest. I love you more than all the stars in the sky. Be strong, my brave boy. Gran. What is buried is not always dead." The words were cryptic, a riddle wrapped in a warning. Start in the barn. The summer swallows. I folded the letter, my mind racing. This wasn't just a sentimental goodbye. It was a map, a set of instructions. The $200,000 offer wasn't a lifeline. It was a trap. And my grandmother, even in death, was trying to help me navigate it. I looked around the dusty, silent kitchen. This place wasn't a ruin. It was a fortress, and she had just handed me the key. I left the house, the afternoon sun feeling warmer now, less indifferent. The world hadn't forgotten me. She hadn't forgotten me. I walked towards the great skeletal barn, my steps sure and steady for the first time in years. I had a purpose. I had a clue. I was no longer a ghost. I was a treasure hunter, and I was about to start digging. The barn was even more imposing up close. It was vast, cathedral-like, with a high, vaulted roof where slivers of daylight poked through missing shingles. The air inside was thick with the scent of old hay, earth, and time itself. It was a quiet, sleeping giant. Pigeons cooed from the high rafters, their soft calls the only sound breaking the silence. I stood in the doorway, letting my eyes adjust to the gloom. The place was mostly empty, save for a few rusted pieces of old farm equipment and stacks of rotting pallets. My gaze drifted upward, searching the rafters for any sign of old nests. And there, in the west-facing corner, high above a section of the floor that seemed darker and less disturbed than the rest, was a cluster of dried mud nests. The place where the summer swallows used to nest. My heart hammered against my ribs. Her clue was real. This was the spot. I walked over, the floorboards groaning under my feet. The area was covered in a thick layer of dust and bits of dried straw. I knelt, running my hands over the rough wooden planks. They were old, wide, and secured with heavy, square-headed nails. Nothing looked out of the ordinary, but her words echoed in my mind. What is buried is not always dead. I started tapping on the boards, listening for a change in sound. Thud, thud, thud. Each one was solid. I moved along the section, tapping and listening, feeling like a fool. What was I even looking for? A hollow spot? A secret latch? For a moment, doubt crept in. Maybe I was just a desperate kid chasing ghosts, reading meaning into the last words of a grieving old woman. Maybe the best thing to do was to go back to town, call Abernathy, and take the money. But then I remembered the look on Gus's face when he talked about Viridian. I remembered the steel in my grandmother's handwriting. She wasn't the type for sentimental nonsense. If she said there was something here, there was something here. I went back to the house and rummaged around until I found an old fireplace poker, heavy and solid. Back in the barn, I used the pointed end to scrape at the dirt and debris packed between the floorboards. It was slow, tedious work. My back ached and sweat dripped into my eyes. After what felt like an hour, the poker hit something that wasn't wood or dirt. It made a faint metallic clink. I dropped to my knees, my breath held tight in my chest, and dug at the spot with my fingers. My nails scraped against the edge of a nail head. But this one was different. It was round, modern, not a square-headed antique like the others. I worked the poker around it, trying to get some leverage. It was wedged in tight. Frustrated, I stood up and looked around the barn. My eyes landed on a rusty crowbar leaning against the far wall. It was heavy, but it felt good in my hands. It felt like a tool with a purpose. I wedged the forked end under the edge of the board with the round nail and put all my weight into it. The old wood groaned in protest. Splinters flew. With a final agonized shriek of rusty metal, the nail gave way and the board popped up. And there, nestled in the dark, cool earth beneath the floor, was a metal box. It was an old Army surplus ammunition can, painted olive drab, with a heavy latch on the front. It was real. It was all real. My grandmother, my quiet, unassuming grandmother, had hidden a secret life under the floor of this barn. I reached down and lifted the box. It was heavy, heavier than it should be for just papers. I carried it out of the dim barn and into the bright, late afternoon sunlight, setting it down in the tall grass. My hands trembled as I worked the stiff latch. It took a moment, my fingers fumbling, but finally it sprang open with a metallic clang. I lifted the lid, and I forgot how to breathe. The box was filled with money, stacks and stacks of it, bundled in paper bands, 50s and 100s, more cash than I had ever seen in my life. It had to be tens of thousands of dollars, maybe more. On top of the money sat another letter, this one in a thick, cream-colored envelope, and a small, sealed manila packet with 2 words written on it in Gran's hand. The truth. My mind couldn't process it. Where did she get this kind of money? The woman who counted every penny, who bought dented cans at the grocery store, who wore her winter coat until the seams were threadbare. Was it from the sale of the farm years ago? Was it savings? Or was it something else entirely? I pushed the cash aside, my hands numb, and picked up the letter. This was the one that mattered. This would explain it. I tore it open. My Leo, it started. If you found this box, then you are smarter and stronger than they will ever give you credit for. I hope you are, my boy, because you will need all your strength now. The money is for you. It is your escape. There is enough here to go anywhere in the world you want. Change your name, start a new life, and never look back. This is what I want for you. A real, clean slate, not the one they pretend to give you. Forget this town, this land, this name. Just be safe. Be happy. I read the words again. This is what I want for you. She wanted me to run. This whole thing, the farm, the clues, the box, it wasn't a call to fight. It was an escape hatch. She had spent years building me a way out. I need to tell you why, the letter continued, and the tone shifted, growing darker. I know you didn't do what they said you did, Leo. I always knew. It wasn't random. They framed you, the company, Viridian, the one that wants this land. They tried to buy it. They tried to threaten me. I wouldn't sell. This land was my parents, and their parents before them. It is part of our soul. When their threats didn't work, they went after the only thing I loved more than this land. They went after you. The world tilted on its axis. It wasn't just a random bust. It wasn't just bad luck. My life hadn't been derailed by chance. It had been deliberately, maliciously destroyed. 2 years of my life, gone. For a piece of dirt. A cold, hard rage, the likes of which I had never felt before, began to burn in my chest. It was so intense it felt like it would incinerate me from the inside out. They had taken my grandmother from me. They had locked me in a cage. And they had done it all so they could build their goddamn luxury condos. I couldn't prove it, Leo, she wrote, her handwriting growing shakier, as if the words themselves were a terrible weight. They are too powerful. I tried. I talked to people. I hired a private investigator with the last of my savings, but they cover their tracks. So I did the only thing I could. I prepared for the worst. I saved every penny I ever earned. I sold off small, forgotten parcels of this land on the far side of the hills over the years, quietly to other farmers. I put it all here for you. Your escape fund, your chance to get away from them forever. So, this was it. The final act of a desperate, protective love. She couldn't save me from them, so she had built me a golden bridge to run away. All I had to do was take it. I looked at the money, then at the small sealed packet marked "The Truth." Do not open the other envelope, Leo, the letter warned. Not unless you are determined to stay. Inside is the proof I could never use. It will only bring you pain. It will put you in their path again. Take the money. Go. Live for me. That is my final wish. Live a long, happy, free life. That is all I have ever wanted. The letter ended there, and so did the world I thought I knew. I was sitting in a field of weeds, next to a fortune I never knew I had, holding a confession I was never meant to read. My grandmother had given me a choice between a safe, anonymous future and a dangerous, righteous past. Run and be free, or stay and fight for the truth, for her, for the 2 years they stole. I held the packet in my hand. The truth. It was so small. It felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I could throw it into the weeds, take the money and be on a bus by morning. No one would ever know. It's what she wanted. But could I live with that? Could I live my life knowing they got away with it? Knowing they broke her heart and stole my youth, and I just ran? This is the kind of moment that defines you. It's a crossroads where you have to decide who you are going to be. Have you ever had a moment like that? A choice where the easy path is safe and the right path is terrifying. If you have, you know the weight of it. You understand what was going through my mind. I'm going to take a moment here. If this story is hitting you, if you've ever had to make a choice between running and fighting, I want you to know you're not alone. This channel is for us, for the people who choose the hard road. If you're one of them, make sure you're subscribed and drop a comment below telling me about a time you chose to stand your ground. Your story matters. Now, let's get back to that field and the choice I had to make. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, the sun beginning its slow descent towards the hills, casting long shadows across the fields. The wind rustled the tall grass, whispering indecipherably, run or fight, safety or truth, her last wish versus my own gnawing need for justice. I thought about the 2 years in that gray box, the constant low-level fear, the casual cruelty of the guards, the nights spent staring at the ceiling, replaying my arrest over and over, trying to understand how my life had gone so wrong. I had believed it was my fault, that I had been too mouthy, too defiant, that I had somehow brought it on myself. That's what they want you to believe. They want you to internalize the blame, because a guilty person doesn't fight back. But I wasn't guilty. I was a target, and my grandmother knew it. She had fought for me in the only way she knew how. She had armed me, not for a battle, but for an escape. Her love for me was so immense that she was willing to let the guilty go free, just to ensure my safety. The thought was both heartbreaking and infuriating. How could I honor her love by ignoring her sacrifice? If I ran, Viridian would get the land. Their victory would be absolute. They would pave over her memory, this last piece of her, and build their monuments to greed on its bones. My name would never be cleared. I would always be the kid who got sent up for dealing, the one who took the money and ran. The story they wrote for me would become my reality. No, I couldn't do it. I couldn't let them win. My grandmother was a fighter. She had stood up to them. The least I could do was finish what she started. With a sense of finality that settled deep in my bones, I picked up the small manila packet. My fingers trembled as I broke the seal. The truth. Inside wasn't a letter. It was a small black USB flash drive and a single folded piece of notepaper. I unfolded the note. The handwriting was hers, but it was hurried, almost frantic. His name is Jimmy Riggs. He works maintenance at the high school. He owed money to the wrong people. They paid off his debt. In exchange, he put the bag in your locker and made the anonymous tip. I confronted him. This is the recording. I'm sorry, Leo. I was going to take it to the police, but then the doctor told me there wasn't much time. I got scared of leaving you to face them alone. Forgive me for being a coward at the end. A coward? She was the bravest person I had ever known. She had faced down a powerful corporation and uncovered their conspiracy, all while she was dying. She hadn't been a coward. She had been a mother bear protecting her cub in the only way she could. Jimmy Riggs. I remembered him, a greasy, nervous man who always looked like he was about to be sick. He'd always avoided eye contact, always hurried away when I was near. I had just thought he was weird. I never suspected he was the architect of my ruin. I looked at the USB drive in my palm. It was so small, so insignificant, yet it held the key to everything. The proof, her voice, his confession. It was a bomb waiting to be detonated. The choice was made. I wasn't running. I was fighting. I carefully packed the flash drive and the notes back into the metal box. The money I left where it was. It wasn't an escape fund anymore. It was a war chest. I closed the lid, the latch clicking shut with a sound of grim finality. The sun was touching the horizon now, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple. The desolate farm didn't look like a ruin anymore. It looked like a battlefield, and I finally knew which side I was on. I needed a plan. I couldn't just walk into the Oak Haven Police Department. For all I knew, Viridian had someone there on their payroll, too. The system had failed me once. I wasn't going to blindly trust it again. I needed someone on my side. Mr. Abernathy, the lawyer. He had been her lawyer. He had seemed decent. Pragmatic, yes, but there was a flicker of something else there, a hint of the old-school justice seeker. He had respected my grandmother. Maybe, just maybe, he would help me. I had to take the chance. I didn't have a phone, and it was too late to walk back to town. I'd have to wait until morning. The thought of spending the night in the dark, empty house should have been terrifying, but it wasn't. I wasn't alone. I could feel her presence everywhere. In the creak of the floorboards, in the scent of the old wood, in the determined set of my own jaw. I went back inside the house as twilight settled, leaving the box of secrets in the tall grass. It felt safer out there than with me. Inside, I didn't bother with the sheets on the furniture. I sat at the kitchen table, the same spot where her letter had waited for me, and I watched the darkness swallow the fields. For the first time in 2 years, I wasn't afraid of the dark. The monsters were real, I knew that now, but they weren't hiding in the shadows. They were hiding in plain sight, in fancy corporate offices, wearing expensive suits. And for the first time, I had a weapon to fight them with. Sleep didn't come easy. I kept thinking about the recording. What did it say? How did she get Riggs to confess? I imagined my grandmother, frail and sick, but with that core of steel, confronting this weasel of a man. The sheer force of will it must have taken. She had handed me the sword. It was up to me to wield it. The next morning, I woke with the sun. The house was cold, and my stomach was a tight knot of hunger and nerves. I found a rusty hand pump over the kitchen sink, and after a few minutes of strenuous effort, managed to coax a stream of icy, metallic-tasting water from it. It was the best thing I'd ever tasted. I retrieved the metal box, its weight a reassuring burden, and started the long walk back to town. The miles seemed shorter this time. Every step felt purposeful. I was no longer an ex-con with nowhere to go. I was a son avenging his mother, the only mother I had ever known. I was a landowner defending his legacy. When I walked into Mr. Abernathy's office, it was just after 9. His secretary, a woman with a helmet of gray hair, looked up in surprise. I must have been a sight, covered in dust, my clothes rumpled, my eyes burning with a feverish intensity. "I need to see him," I said, my voice steady. "It's about the Reyes property." She must have seen something in my face because she didn't argue. She just picked up the phone. A moment later, Abernathy appeared at his office door, his expression a mixture of curiosity and annoyance. "Mr. Reyes, I didn't expect to see you so soon. Have you considered Viridian's offer?" "I'm not selling," I said, walking past him and into his office. I set the heavy ammunition can on his pristine mahogany desk with a loud thud. He stared at the box, then at me, his eyebrows raised. "What is this?" "It's my inheritance," I said. "The real one." I opened the box. The sight of the money made his eyes widen, but I pushed it aside, pulling out the cream-colored letter, the note about Riggs, and the small USB drive. I placed them on the desk in front of him. "My grandmother didn't just leave me a farm," I said, my voice low and shaking with controlled fury. "She left me evidence, evidence that I was framed by Viridian developments, evidence that they destroyed my life to get their hands on my land." Abernathy stared at the items, then looked up at me, his face pale. He picked up the letter, his hands surprisingly steady, and began to read. I watched him, my heart pounding. This was it, the moment of truth. Would he be a man of law or a man of business? Would he help me or would he show me the door? Mr. Abernathy read the letter from the box slowly, his expression growing more grim with every line. He then picked up the small, frantic note about Jimmy Riggs and the recording, his lips tightening into a thin, hard line. He looked from the notes to me, his gaze sharp and penetrating, as if trying to see right through me to the truth of it all. For a long moment, the only sound in the office was the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. "She confronted him?" he finally asked, his voice a low murmur. "She recorded it?" I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. "On this?" He gestured to the small USB drive lying on his desk. "That's what the note says." He leaned back in his chair, looking not at me, but at the ceiling, as if the answer he was looking for was written there. The tweed and peppermint lawyer seemed to recede, replaced by someone harder, more formidable. I was seeing, I realized, the man my grandmother had trusted. "Viridian has been a cancer on this county for 5 years, he said, his voice cold. "Bullying, intimidating, using legal loopholes to force families out of their homes. We've always suspected they played dirty, but we've never had concrete proof. They're smart. They use intermediaries, cutouts, men like Jimmy Riggs." He finally lowered his gaze to meet mine. The disappointment I had first seen in his eyes was gone, replaced by a kind of weary respect. "Your grandmother, Elena, she was a remarkable woman. I underestimated her." He paused, picking up the flash drive and holding it between his thumb and forefinger, as if weighing it. "And I underestimated you." He swiveled in his chair to face a small, sleek laptop on his credenza. "Let's see what truth Elena managed to capture." He inserted the drive into the USB port. A few clicks of the mouse and a single audio file appeared on the screen. "Conversation MP3 out." My breath hitched. He double-clicked it. A moment of silence, then static, and then a voice, her voice. "Thank you for meeting me, Mr. Riggs." It was her, but weaker than I remembered, threaded with a fragility that twisted my gut. She sounded tired, so tired. "I ain't got much time, Elena," a man's voice mumbled, nervous, shifty, Jimmy Riggs. "I know what you did," Gran said, her voice quiet but clear as a bell, cutting through the static. There was no accusation in it, just a statement of fact. I don't know what you're talking about." "My grandson, Leo, the bag in his locker." There was a long silence. I could hear the faint sound of a car passing in the background of the recording. Then Riggs's voice, cracking. "They said no one would get hurt. They said he'd just get probation, a slap on the wrist. They told me he was a punk, a troublemaker anyway." "He's a child," Gran shot back, and for a second the steel was there, the fierceness I remembered. "A child who lost his parents, who I raised. He was all I had." "I'm sorry," Riggs whispered. It was a pathetic sound. "I needed the money. You don't know what it's like, being in that deep." "Who told you to do it?" Gran pressed, her voice relentless. "Who were they?" "I can't say. They'll kill me, my family." "Was it the people from Viridian? The ones who want my farm?" Another silence, longer this time. I leaned forward, my hands gripping the arms of the chair. Mr. Abernathy was frozen, his eyes glued to the screen. "Yes," Riggs finally choked out. The word was barely audible, a surrendered breath. "They said you were a stubborn old woman, that you were standing in the way of progress. They said if the kid was gone, you'd be easier to persuade. They said to use him to send you a message." The recording ended there, just like that. The silence that filled the office was heavier, more profound than before. Mr. Abernathy slowly removed the flash drive, placing it back on the desk as if it were a sacred relic. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose, his shoulders slumping. He looked older than he had 10 minutes ago. They used a child as leverage in a real estate deal, he said, his voice thick with disgust. They put your grandson away for 2 years to send a message. He looked at me, and for the first time I saw genuine, unreserved empathy in his eyes. It wasn't pity. It was the shared outrage of a decent man confronted with profound indecency. They didn't count on his grandmother being a damn sight tougher than they were, he added, a grim smile touching his lips. He stood up and began to pace the small office. This recording, it's a bombshell. Riggs's confession explicitly names Viridian. This isn't just a civil matter anymore. This is conspiracy, evidence tampering, contributing to the delinquency of a minor, a whole host of criminal charges. So what do we do? I asked, my own voice trembling slightly. The rage was still there, but now it was mixed with a wild, surging hope. We don't go to the local police, he said immediately, confirming my own fears. The chief of police plays golf with Viridian's regional manager every Thursday. We can't trust them. We go over their heads. We go to the state attorney general, and we go to the press. He stopped pacing and looked at me, his expression deadly serious. But you need to understand, Leo, once we do this, there's no going back. Viridian is a multi-million-dollar corporation. They have armies of lawyers. They will try to discredit you. They will try to discredit your grandmother. They will dig into every corner of your life and paint you as a delinquent who's making up a fantasy to extort them. It's going to be a war, a long, ugly public war. He gestured to the open box on his desk. Your grandmother gave you an alternative, enough money to vanish, to be safe. Are you sure you want to give that up? Are you sure you're ready for this fight? I thought of her weak voice on the recording. I thought of her sitting at that kitchen table writing me a map to freedom because she thought she had failed. I thought of the 2 years they stole, not just from me, but from her. The last 2 years of her life, spent worrying, fighting, and dying alone. She didn't fail, I said, my voice clear and strong. She just ran out of time. I'm not running. Let's go to war. A slow, determined smile spread across Mr. Abernathy's face. It transformed him. He looked like a general who had just been given the signal to attack. All right, son, he said, clapping a hand on my shoulder. The gesture was firm, grounding. Let's go to war. He spent the rest of the day on the phone. His voice was calm and authoritative, a world away from the dry, dusty man I had first met. He made calls to a trusted colleague in the state capitol, a journalist he knew at a major newspaper, and a private investigator he kept on retainer. With each call, the gears of justice, the real ones, slowly began to turn. While he worked, I sat in his office, the adrenaline slowly giving way to a profound exhaustion. He had his secretary order us sandwiches from the diner Gus had mentioned. As I ate, I realized it was the first real meal I'd had in 2 days. It was the first time I had felt safe enough to be hungry. Late in the afternoon, Abernathy hung up the phone after a long, intense conversation. Okay, he said, turning to me. Here's the plan. My contact at the AG's office is interested. Very interested. He's going to start a preliminary, off-the-books inquiry. The investigator is going to do a deep dive into Viridian's other land acquisitions in the state, looking for a pattern. And the reporter, she's ready to break the story, but we need to be smart about the timing. He leaned forward, his eyes locked on mine. The most important thing right now is your safety and the safety of that recording. Viridian cannot know we have it. If they do, they'll do anything to get it back, and they'll get to Riggs before we can. He's our star witness. We need to put him in a position where he has no choice but to cooperate and testify. The plan was sound. It was real, but it also meant more waiting, more hiding. What do I do now? I asked. For now you disappear, he said, but not in the way your grandmother intended. You go back to the farm. It's the last place they'll look for you. They think you're a scared kid who's going to take their money and run. Let them think that. Lay low, don't talk to anyone. I'll be in touch. I'll bring you supplies. We wait for the right moment to strike. He took the USB drive and made several encrypted copies, storing them in different secure locations. He gave one back to me. Keep this on you at all times. Don't lose it. He then looked at the box of money. Your grandmother's war chest, he said with a wry smile. We'll use it. For legal fees, for the investigator, for whatever we need to win this. I nodded. The money wasn't for my escape. It was for her justice. That evening, Gus drove me back to the farm. He didn't ask any questions this time. He just gave me a knowing look in the rearview mirror, a look of quiet solidarity. As he dropped me off, he pressed a small, cheap burner phone into my hand. Abernathy's idea, he said. It's prepaid. His number is the only one in it. Call if you need anything, anything at all. I stood in front of the dark, silent house, the burner phone in one hand and the USB drive in my pocket. The house didn't feel like a ruin anymore. It felt like a safe house, a command center. The fight wasn't over. In fact, it had just begun. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't fighting alone. I had my grandmother's love, a lawyer's cunning, and the truth, small and powerful, tucked safely in my pocket. The days that followed were a strange mixture of tension and peace. I was in hiding, a fugitive in my own home, yet I felt a sense of calm I hadn't known in years. The farm became my sanctuary. I spent the daylight hours working, driven by a restless energy. I started by clearing out the barn, sweeping away decades of dust and debris, organizing the old tools I found hanging on the walls. The physical labor was grounding. It tired my body and quieted my mind. With every swing of a hammer repairing a loose board, with every patch I nailed over a hole in the roof, I felt like I was healing a part of myself. I was literally rebuilding the house my grandmother had left me. I explored the 120 acres that were mine. I walked the perimeter, following the old stone walls that marked its boundaries. I climbed the hill behind the house and looked out over the valley. From up there, I could see why Viridian wanted this land so badly. It was a perfect sweeping vista of green hills and distant blue mountains. It was beautiful. It was a piece of paradise they wanted to pave over. I found a small, overgrown cemetery near the edge of the property with a handful of weathered headstones bearing the name Reyes. My great-grandparents, my great-great-grandparents. Their names were etched in stone, rooted in this soil. My grandmother's words came back to me. This land is in our blood. I finally understood. Selling it would have been like selling a piece of our family's soul. Mr. Abernathy came by every few days, his car kicking up dust on the dirt track. He brought groceries, news, and a quiet, reassuring presence. The investigation was proceeding, slowly but surely. The private investigator had found 2 other cases in nearby counties where Viridian had acquired land under suspicious circumstances, both involving legal trouble for family members who were holding up the sale. A pattern was emerging. The reporter was chomping at the bit, but Abernathy held her back. Timing is everything, Leo, he'd say. We only get one shot to blow this wide open. We need to make it count. He was also working on getting Jimmy Riggs. He'd found out that Riggs had a daughter with a serious medical condition, and his finances were still a mess. He was vulnerable. Abernathy was building a case, a legal framework to offer Riggs protection in exchange for his testimony. It was a delicate, high-stakes game of chess. One night I couldn't sleep. The weight of everything, the waiting, the uncertainty was pressing down on me. I went into the house, and for the first time, I went through my grandmother's things. I had avoided it until now, afraid of the grief it would unleash. I opened the drawers of a dusty dresser in the upstairs bedroom. Inside, I found her clothes neatly folded, smelling of cedar and thyme. I found old photographs, a young, smiling version of her with a man who must have been my grandfather, a picture of my own parents, young and vibrant, on their wedding day, a photo of me as a baby, swaddled in a blanket in her arms. And then I found a box of her journals. They were simple spiral notebooks filled with her spidery cursive. I sat on the floor and began to read. They weren't diaries of daily events. They were garden journals. Page after page was dedicated to the rhythm of the seasons, to the science and magic of making things grow. April 10th, late frost last night. Covered the tomato seedlings, hope they survived. The earth is still cold, but wants to wake up. July 28th, first real harvest of beans. More than enough. We'll take some to the food pantry. The land is generous if you listen to it. But woven between the notes about soil pH and companion planting was the story of her life. Her grief after my grandfather died. Her joy when I was born. Her quiet struggle to make ends meet. And then, in the last journal, the tone changed. The entries about the garden became fewer, replaced by anxious, worried notes. March 5th. Men in suits came again today. They don't understand the word no. They look at this land and see only money. They don't see the bones. May 12th. They're watching Leo. I see them. Cars I don't recognize near his school. This feels different. Colder. September 14th. The entry was short, the handwriting jagged. Leo was arrested. My boy. They did it. They finally did it. Reading those words, her pain was so palpable it felt like a physical blow. I had been so wrapped up in my own suffering that I hadn't truly considered the hell she must have gone through, the fear, the helplessness, the rage. I cried then. For the first time since I was a child, I sat on the floor of that dusty room and wept. I cried for her, for the fight she had to endure alone. I cried for the years we had lost. I cried for the scared, lonely boy I had been. And when the tears finally subsided, a quiet resolve settled in their place. This wasn't just about clearing my name anymore. It was about honoring hers. The next morning, I went out to the patch of land behind the house, the spot she had designated in her journals as her vegetable garden. It was choked with weeds and thorns. I found an old spade in the barn, its wooden handle smooth with age. I sank the blade into the earth. It was hard, rocky soil. But I remembered her words. The earth is still cold, but wants to wake up. I worked all day, clearing the weeds, turning the soil, pulling out rocks. My hands were raw, my muscles screamed. But with every patch of ground I cleared, I felt like I was reclaiming something. I wasn't just clearing a garden, I was preparing the ground for a new beginning. A week later, Abernathy arrived with a look on his face I hadn't seen before. It was a look of grim triumph. "It's time," he said. He had made his move on Riggs. Armed with the recording and the investigators' findings, he had presented Riggs with a choice. Be the state's key witness and get immunity, or face conspiracy charges alongside Viridian and likely go to prison for a very long time, leaving his sick daughter with no one. Riggs had folded. He had signed a detailed affidavit, corroborating everything on the recording and providing more details about his contact at Viridian. "The story breaks tomorrow morning," Abernathy said. "Front page. The Attorney General is holding a press conference at 10 a.m. to announce a full-scale investigation into Viridian's business practices across the state. It's all happening." He looked at me, his expression serious. "Tomorrow your life is going to change again. You'll be in the spotlight. People will know your name. Are you ready?" I looked out at the field I had just cleared. The dark, rich soil was turned, waiting. "I'm ready," I said. The next morning the world exploded. The newspaper story was a bombshell, a meticulously detailed account of Viridian's predatory tactics, with my story and my grandmother's fight at its center. My face, a 2-year-old school picture, was on the front page. The AG's press conference was carried on all the news channels. He called my grandmother a hero. He called Viridian a corporate predator. The fallout was immediate. Viridian's stock plummeted. Their CEO resigned. Local officials, including the chief of police, were placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The story was everywhere. I watched it all unfold on a small television Abernathy had brought me. It felt surreal, like I was watching a movie about someone else's life. That afternoon, a car came up the dirt road. It wasn't Abernathy, it was Ms. Albright, my old social worker. She got out of the car and just stood there for a moment, looking at me, then at the farm. "I saw the news," she said, her voice quiet. I had no idea. We all thought, the system, it just..." She trailed off, looking ashamed. "I'm so sorry, Leo." "It wasn't your fault," I said. And I meant it. She was just one cog in a broken machine. "What you've done, what your grandmother did," she said, her eyes welling up. "It's incredible." She handed me an envelope. "This is from the state. It's a formal apology and a preliminary settlement offer for your wrongful conviction. It's not enough, not nearly enough to make up for what you went through, but it's a start." It was a check for a substantial amount of money, another small piece of justice. But it wasn't the money that mattered. It was the apology. It was the acknowledgement. My name was cleared. Officially, the weight that had been sitting on my chest for 2 years finally, truly lifted. I could breathe. The legal battles would continue for months, even years. Abernathy was filing a massive civil suit against Viridian on my behalf. But the main fight, the fight for the truth, was over. We had won. A few days later, I was standing in the newly cleared garden patch when Gus's taxi pulled up. He got out, holding 2 cardboard flats of tiny green seedlings. "Heard you were starting a garden," he said with a grin. "Figured you could use a hand. These are tomatoes and beans, hardy varieties. Your grandma used to swear by them." He set them down on the soft earth. We stood there for a moment side by side, looking at the empty field. "She'd be proud of you, kid," he said softly. "Real proud." I looked at the tiny, fragile seedlings, then at the vast expanse of my land, my home. The farm was no longer a ruin or a fortress or a battlefield. It was just a farm, a place of quiet potential, a place to put down roots. My inheritance wasn't the money or even the land itself. It was the strength I'd found in its soil. It was the legacy of a woman who taught me that some things are not for sale. It was the chance to grow something new from the ashes of the past. The journey was far from over. There were scars. There would always be scars. But for the first time, I wasn't looking back at what was lost. I was looking forward to the planting season, to the future, to home. This whole experience taught me something profound. It taught me that inheritance isn't always about what you're given. It's about what you choose to do with it. My grandmother left me a deed to a piece of land, yes, but the real inheritance was a choice. She left me a path to safety and a path to justice, and trusted me to choose the one my own heart needed. She knew that true strength isn't about avoiding the fight. It's about knowing which fights are worth having. Home, I learned, isn't just 4 walls and a roof. It's the ground beneath your feet that holds your history. It's the place where you can finally stop running and start building. My home had been waiting for me all along, disguised as a ruin, holding its breath until I was ready to claim it. It wasn't the house or the barn, but the legacy of resilience embedded in the very soil. It was the strength to turn a field of weeds into a garden, to turn a story of loss into a story of justice. It's the responsibility to protect the things that matter, not because they are valuable, but because they are part of you. The world is full of forces like Viridian, faceless, powerful systems that try to convince you that you are small and alone. They will try to write your story for you, to cast you as the villain or the victim. But they don't get to have the final word. You do. You get to decide if you take the easy money or if you dig for the truth. You get to decide if you run from your past or if you turn and face it, using its weight to make you stronger. Your story is your own. Your inheritance is the strength you find when you're tested, the community you build when you feel alone, and the truth you fight for when it seems impossible. It doesn't come with a deed or a key. It's something you have to earn every single day. If you've made it this far, thank you. Thank you for listening, for being a part of this. My story is just one story, but I know there are millions more like it out there. Maybe you've faced an injustice that felt too big to fight. Maybe you've inherited a struggle you didn't ask for. Maybe you're standing at your own crossroads right now, trying to decide between the safe path and the right one. I want you to know that you are not alone. This community we're building here is a place for those stories. It's a place for the fighters, the survivors, the builders. So if this meant something to you, please subscribe and become a part of it. And more than that, I want you to share a piece of your own story in the comments below. Tell me about an inheritance you received that wasn't about money. It could be a lesson from a grandparent, a strength you discovered in a hard time, or a piece of truth you fought to protect. I will read every single one, because your story matters. It has power, and by sharing it, we remind each other that even when we feel buried, we are not dead. We are just waiting for the right moment to grow.